You got to have, all of us have some skin in the game. My wife is a type 1 diabetic. That makes it very, very difficult, if not impossible, for school board members to say, we want to put more of those resources in the classroom. When he took millions, hundreds of millions of dollars out of the school aid formula, particularly affecting declining enrollment districts, of which there are many in this area, he took a devastating hit at education. What we have to do is not continue down the same path. We've got to change it. The interesting thing is, a couple of weeks ago, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush came in to campaign for me here in Wisconsin. About 15 years ago, Florida had some of the worst test scores in the country. Jeb Bush came in as governor for 2 terms, pushed what he called an A-plus plan for education. It talked about assessments. It talked about grading schools, literally giving schools grades. It talked about pay for performance for teachers. It talked about holding people accountable. And today, when those results came out last month, Florida was the #1 state on the list for the race to the top. It's because he demanded accountability and he was willing to do something about it. We do assessment of teachers in this state, but we don't do anything with those assessments. Now, I love teachers. My kids go to public schools. There's many great teachers there. I'd like to reward the ones who do one hell of a good job. And the ones that don't, I'd like to help them find another profession. Because there's got to be, nowhere else in society do we not hold people accountable for performance. We need to do that. We cannot, not just to compete with Minnesota or Iowa or Illinois, but to compete with China, India, Mexico. We've got to be globally competitive. Those kids in China and Japan are in school all the time. They're focused. They're learning. We got to make sure we don't let up one bit here. And to me, it starts just like you would any of your businesses. You got to have clear assessment of what your objectives are, go out and measure it, and then hold people accountable for it.
I have a question about the ag community in Wisconsin. We really have been almost hit by use value being taken away from some local areas, and Pat Kreitlow, the senator here, definitely was in favor of that, and I know, do you want to speak to some of the ag issues?
Sure. Yeah, for me it's interesting because not only did I grow up in Delavan, which is a smaller town, but for a little while, when I was real young, my dad was a preacher, so I moved around the country a couple of times. I live in Plainfield, Iowa, which is a town about 450. So for me, even though I live in Milwaukee County, agriculture is not a foreign issue. And I was proud, even as a lawmaker from Wauwatosa years ago, to be one of the co-sponsors of farmland use value assessment. Because what we were seeing is, in many of our areas across the state, as growth was happening with building, particularly home building, it was encroaching upon farmland, and the assessed values would go so high, it would drive farmers out of farms. I was proud to support that, and that's probably, from a farm and agricultural standpoint, one of the fundamental differences between Tom Barrett and I. Tom Barrett and his predecessor in Milwaukee, John Norquist, had fought that law for years. I supported it, co-sponsored, got a Friend of Agriculture award because of it, and as governor, I would fight to maintain that here in the state of Wisconsin. That, as much as anything, will help farmers. Now, there's other issues. I mentioned health savings accounts would be tremendously helpful. Certainly, I would continue to support the Right to Farm Act that's in place to make sure that farmers aren't under constant siege when it comes to frivolous and nuisance lawsuits. Certainly think when you talk about the DNR, there's got to be a lot more balance out there when you talk about non-point pollution regulations and groundwater and other issues, so that farmers can actually farm and aren't under constant siege from state agencies. We've got to do all of those sorts of things. When you think about it, manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism built this state for the last 160 years. I am convinced that those 3 industries, manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism, will build this state out of the recession. If only we have leaders in Madison who put their faith in those same industries instead of treating them like they're ugly stepchildren. Too many people in Madison think like that's a thing of the past. I'm all for life sciences out of Madison and financial services down the Milwaukee area, but those alone are not going to sustain the state's economy. And as governor, I'm committed to making sure we have a governor who understands that those 3 core industries are not only a part of our heritage, they're going to be a part of our future. So with that, I think, you know what, I'm going to disobey my staff who's told me one more. I'm going to go one more over here, and then I'm going to end it because I've gone 2 more past.
Privatizing corrections?
Privatizing? I would not. In the past, I supported when we had a overcrowding problem in this state. I supported us sending inmates to Texas, where there were county jails down there, and I supported private prisons in Tennessee that took inmates when we had excessive overcrowding problems in the state of Wisconsin. But I would not privatize the prisons we currently have in the state. In my mind, in Milwaukee County, it's very similar. I privatized all sorts of other things, but public service, or it should be public safety, to me is a priority, whether it's in police or correctional services. I would maintain it. And the irony is, for all the talk, we've been talking about this before, the chatter of some of the unions, the reality is I've said that consistently, and in my budgets as county executive, last year's a good example, I didn't propose furloughing any of my correctional officers or sheriff's deputies. Jim Doyle did furlough correctional officers, and Tom Barrett, as the mayor of Milwaukee, did furlough police officers. So I said there's a clear contrast out there between each of us, in the same way that the mayor of Milwaukee also took a firefighter off of every rig, while I maintain the paramedic system that the county funds in Milwaukee County. Public safety should be a priority. You find a way to fund that along with other priorities, and things that aren't, you either privatize or you find ways to do other things with them.
Thank you.
Probably the last thing I'll just end with, just in terms of the difference, besides our positive thing, the 250,000 of brown bag teams, the other difference I tell you, if people ask about the difference between Mayor Barrett, who's running for governor on the Democrat side, and I said it's real simple. If you think the last 8 years under Jim Doyle have provided us with a better business climate, a better job climate from when we started out 8 years ago, then you should vote for Tom Barrett. Because Tom Barrett has embraced all of the same policies that Jim Doyle has. What you'll get is a third term of Jim Doyle, of the exact same thing, just from a much nicer guy. But if you're like me, and you believe this state under these policies of the last 8 years is headed down the wrong direction, down the wrong path, and that we need a fundamental change, not just a change that's a slogan, but that's based on getting the state back on track again, working again, and getting government out of the way, then I think I'm your only choice. Thanks so much for listening.